Hi, my name's Eric Swanson, and for the last 15 years I've worked with Leadership Network, but I've also worked for a tech company up in Boulder, Colorado. I may have seen the other video. I mentioned that in the last 5 years, 5,600 startup companies have started in Boulder, while 52 church planters have left. And it got me thinking what's happening in the startup community that's not happening in the church community. So it's the supportive ecosystem, it's a number of things, but it's also how people start their businesses. It might be different than people how traditionally start churches. Startups are not just smaller versions of bigger things, but the whole purpose of a startup is to do one thing, and that's to discover the sustainable business model through experimentation. So a few years ago, traditionally when you started a business, you'd write a business plan, and it'd be basically just a guess. Here's the income streams, here's all the stuff, here's the competitive environment, here's our management structure, here's our lead team, here's all credentialed they are. And then you'd raise a bunch of money, and oftentimes, more often than not, it wouldn't work. But they'd waste a lot of money in the meantime, because they'd build a product perhaps that in the end, nobody really wanted. And so rather than writing a business plan, the way that most businesses are starting today are through what's called a business strategy canvas. And it's really helpful for church planters because it's simply got, I think, 8 boxes in here. And you just start playing around with sticky notes on your first round of assumptions that all need to be tested. And so the first thing we want to do is create, right up here, what's the value proposition of your enterprise? Of your product or service. For your church, what would you say? What are you offering to people in your community where you're starting a church? What pain are you relieving? What gain are you giving there? Why would someone want to attend your church? Why would somebody want to buy your products or services? And so you might say, so your first go-around might be something like this, that as a church, what we do, so value proposition is what you do. And you might say, well we help people, we help connect people to people, and we help connect people to God in a community that's changing the world. I kind of like that. That would be a great way to start a church. And then the second thing we do, well, who are we trying to reach over here? Who are our customer segments? Our customer segments, some people call them personas, but it's always a person with a desire and a motive. So as one I wrote up here, as a 20-something programmer, I want to connect with a vibrant faith community so that I continue my path of growth and impact like I had in college. That's a persona. It might be as a single mom. I'm looking for a place to connect my kids to a faith community so my kids will grow up with a strong faith foundation. But you have to start outlining who is it that you're trying to reach, because you probably can't reach everybody, but you want to reach those people that no other church in your community is reaching, so you define it there. So your customer segments, you play around with that a little bit. And so the biggest thing, what businesses stand and fall on, is what's called the product customer match. And what happens, I was talking with a young planter, and he said that he was going. I said, "Tell me about your church." He said, "Well, I just left the startup church, a church plant, because the pastor was targeting the people at the bottom of the economic pyramid." He says, "I'm a programmer. I'm kind of at the top." And he said, and because he was targeting that audience, eventually he said, "There's no place for me in this church." And so he left that church, because he wasn't part of that target audience. The next thing we want to do is to figure out, is our customer relationships, how do we get customers? And what do they expect from us once we get them there? And so the 3 things you want to ask there is, how do we get customers, how do we keep customers, and how do we grow customers? So how do we get customers? We say, well, we get them from, all of our staff, our staff team of 4 or 5, we hang out in community. We join clubs. I'm getting to know the barista. He invited me behind the counter last week to help make some lattes, And we host parties. But this is how we get customers. And it's through friends telling their friends. That's what we hope how we're going to get customers. How do we keep customers? Well, we really think that community is so important to put people in small groups. And that's how we intend to keep them. And how are we going to grow them? Well, we have an intentional discipleship and leadership strategy that leaders become leaders of leaders of leaders of leaders, etc. And again, these are leap of faith assumptions, but that's what we at least have some hypotheses that we can test. Next thing we want to do is how do we reach these people? These are called distribution channels. How do we reach people? And so it might be, I already mentioned this, but we hang out, we all have a coffee shop that we go to. and we hang out with the barista, and we know his name and his wife's name and his kids' names, and we do that, and we have a weekly gathering of people. Or maybe it's a monthly gathering, and it's in the park, and we do a service event together. Or maybe it's we send out a weekly email. Maybe we have regular Facebook posts, and we have Twitter feeds that we ask our people to subscribe to. Maybe I write a blog as a pastor. I write a blog, and that kind of gets sent to the people that are involved. But those are our distribution channels. How do we get what we have and connect it with these people? It's through these things. And you have to think of everything you do to do that, between your product, what you have to offer, and the customers you're trying to serve. Next thing you want to look at is over here is who are your key partners. And so if you're a planter, if you're a church entrepreneur, you've got sponsoring churches, hopefully. You've got personal supporters, maybe. You've got denominational leaders. If you're a denominational planter, a network plant, Acts 29, or a SOMA or anything like that, you've got sort of some other people that are there. They have a vested interest in you succeeding. It might be the building owner that said, hey, you can have, I'm a believer, I'd like to give you a kind of free rent for a year in my little place here that you guys can launch your church in. But that guy's a key partner. Then you have, what is it that you do? Those are called your key activities. And so you've got a worship service, you've got small groups, you've got leadership, your leadership pipeline, you've got community service that you do together, you do prayer, and you can kind of list all those things that you do as a church that are the expressions of the value you're building for the customers that you serve. And again, before you even launch, you can start playing around with the strategy canvas and say, we think this is what our activities are going to be. We think these are our list of partners that we're going to need. Then key resources really answers the question, what is it that you need to pull this whole thing off? And that is, you're going to need some money, you're going to need staff, you need volunteers, you need facilities, you need technology, whatever that list is, but you start playing around with that list, but all of a sudden you start getting a big picture of what it's going to take to launch this spiritual enterprise. And then you have two more things here. One is the cost structure. What's this whole thing going to cost? Are you going to be full-time paid staff? Or are they going to be bivocational? Or are they going to be volunteer staff? You have facilities that most likely are going to cost you money. Working in the San Francisco area, one church planter pays $40,000 a month for the rent for his building. And that's pretty pricey. They have to figure out how to pay for that. They have different expenses through programming and things like that, and materials. And they have equipment, your computers, and all your technology stuff. And so once you figure out what your cost structure is, then you have to figure out, well, how are we going to pay for this stuff? And that's your revenue streams. So you have sponsoring churches. Again, you might have some individual personal supporters. You might ask for donations. You might have a bake sale. But eventually you have to get down to people from the church. Remember the three things. Do they want this? Are they willing to pay for it? And do they want to get it from you? And so this is kind of the second question. Are people willing to pay for it? They're either benefiting from something that has some value for them. One of the things I picked up from this whole field is a very interesting thing called the lifetime value of a customer versus the cost of acquisition. And the idea is this, is if it costs you $5, if you're selling a product and it costs you $5 to get a customer, and you sell your product or you make a profit of $4, you won't stay in business because you're losing $1 in every sale. And so somehow you have to, if you kind of keep that in mind, that to be sustainable, the lifetime value of whoever these people are. You might have people that want to support you. You might be in a very tough area of our country or the world. And you might have a bunch of supporters that say, hey, we're with you to the end. We know you'll never have a self-sustaining church. You're working in a very economically deprived area. So we want to support you for that. You got to count that into the equation. But for most of you, to be a sustainable church, it's eventually going to be the people that you're serving, the people that you're helping to grow. Those will be the ones that sustain this ministry. So there ought to be, so again, to be sustainable, we have to, the lifetime value of them, remember, get, keep, and grow, has to be more than the cost of acquiring those, which is all of your staff salaries, all your advertising, all your marketing, etc. So I hope this has been helpful to you. I hope you take a stab at this. If you just Google business startup or business strategy canvas, this will come up. You can print it off. Make it real big like this and put it up in your room wherever you're meeting your lead team. Just play around with those things. Then again, test these assumptions. There's no knowledge in the room. All these things to be tested. So again, it's Lean Startup. I recommend a couple books. One, you can Google these guys and watch them on YouTube also. But Peter Thiel, who started PayPal, wrote the book 0 to 1. Eric Ries, who wrote the book The Lean Startup. And if you want to get really ambitious, if you go to Udacity, udacity.com, it's a massive online open course called a MOOC. And if you type in these words, how to build a startup, you'll come to Steve Blank's class. Steve teaches in 2 to 4 minute segments, all animated. Every 4 to 6 lessons, he has a quiz. And if you took your lead team through that, you will totally be changed in how you're starting your church. So I just want to say, Godspeed. Thank you for being entrepreneurs of the kingdom. Thanks for trying to build something that doesn't exist with resources you don't have. Thanks for the faith that you have. And I just wish you the best in this God-given endeavor.